purple silk. I am living up to my Tumblr username today. Got this at an antique store for $3, baby. As you probably know if you've clicked on this video, last September I abandoned all of my previous sources of channel content on a whim to try to watch every highlight of David Tennant's filmography in 2 months, culminating in the most exhaustive video essay of my YouTube career, spanning 30 years of roles in nearly 2 hours. That's longer than most contemporary productions of Macbeth. One would assume, especially if you were my very impressed but slightly concerned for my sanity parents, that after completing such a mind-melting task, I would be ready to put David back on the shelf for a bit. One would be sorely mistaken. I just watched 27 pieces of media for this guy, and I was having ideas. I had edits to make, songs to write, and thanks to the cries of "What about insert role here?" flooding my comments section, somehow still more selections of his filmography to get through. And it's not like David ever slowed down either. He starred in the Donmar Warehouse production of Macbeth, giving a performance that my boyfriend says blew his Hamlet out of the water. I'm sadly going to London too early to see it, but I await the pro shot with bated breath. He hosted the BAFTA Film Awards, which led to the single most insane thing that has ever happened to me.
The level of analysis that your outfit is going to come up.
Can you even imagine, Lawrence?
Thank you for your attention to detail.
I love the Phileas Fogg. It's giving me Phileas Fogg.
I like to get Phileas Fogg.
He was nominated for an Olivier Award and an internet-breaking first BAFTA, sadly neither of which he won, which gave me a small existential crisis about whether or not the only people who genuinely think he deserves to win awards are mentally ill, chronically online fangirls, and now I need to stop being delusional and learn to manage my expectations. Jesus Christ, Lauren, are you capable of being normal about anything? Later this year, Rivals will see David play Lord Tony Badingham, who just so happens to be based on a certain TV executive who cancelled a certain classic sci-fi show, which thereby gives David the chance to do the funniest thing ever. And of course, now I've actually met him, having been lucky enough to get several earth-shatteringly delightful encounters with him at Dallas Fan Expo, which I'll no doubt expand upon in more detail in a future video. Yeah, when your special interest is an actual living, working person who just keeps doing fun and interesting things, it's kind of difficult to stop rotating him around in your brain. After all, as I once said, the thing about David Tennant is that you can claim he is not the best actor in the world. You can claim that he is not the hottest actor in the world. But you cannot deny that he is the most microwavable. With all of that said, as much as I do hope to get back to integrating my content about David a bit more evenly with other things, I did want to get some of the residual brain bees out of my system and make a video about all the things I've watched with David in the 6 months since the video essay came out, since I'm sure a lot of you are anxious to hear my thoughts about them. I'll start, of course, with one of the things which inspired me to write the video essay in the first place, which wound up coinciding with its release. Da-da-da-dun, 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 do it! The GOAT is back, baby! God, I have just had the best time getting back into Doctor Who. I took quite a bit of a break from it for most of high school, and this past year has really reminded me just how formative of a series it was for me in my early fandom days. The newest season has had its fair share of haters, some with valid reasoning, some not so much. But in my opinion, it's shaping out to be possibly the best season since season 4, with Ncuti Gatwa and Millie Gibson rivaling David and Catherine for absolutely phenomenal Doctor-companion chemistry. They just burst off the screen together, and every single episode this season has just gone so hard, conceptually and emotionally. And yes, I am including space babies. No season of Doctor Who is complete without something as goofy as space babies, and if you don't think so, I'm not entirely convinced you liked Doctor Who to begin with. But of course, I promised to talk about the specials, which were the perfect reintroduction to Russell's writing in all its warm, witty, whimsical, unabashedly ridiculous, flawed, but fantastic glory. I've certainly noticed my fair share of issues watching them. What's with the weird bioessentialism in Star Beast? While Blue Yonder is otherwise such a world-class episode, why are the first 10 minutes so awkward? Couldn't they have made the defeat of the Toymaker feel a tiny bit less easy? But I ultimately can't stay mad at quibbles as small as these, because these specials did exactly what I wanted them to do. They healed my inner child and gave some gorgeous, much-deserved closure to the most beloved Doctor-companion duo. As someone who, like many baby nerds, was left emotionally scarred by the End of Time Part 2, I tried my best to emotionally prepare myself once again for the seemingly inevitable loss of my favorite Doctor mere weeks after his return, only hoping that this time he wouldn't have to regenerate sad and alone. Of course, I don't think anyone could have prepared me for what actually ended up happening. The bi-generation is easily one of the most divisive things to have happened in Doctor Who, with its biggest detractors claiming that it broke the show's mythology or stole the spotlight from Ncuti Gatwa, the first black actor to play the Doctor full-time. However, while there's valid arguments for both, I'd have to disagree with both of these points. First of all, Doctor Who does ridiculous canon-breaking things all the time. It's got too big and complex of a universe and history not to, and at least this one had a very clear in-universe justification. Second of all, I feel like it should be pretty obvious that the bi-generation actually gives Ncuti significantly more spotlight than he would have had otherwise. If David's return stole anybody's thunder, it was Jodie's. Most Doctors only get about a minute post-regeneration to sell the audience on their performance, and on top of that, they've got to deal with the added weight of the audience's sadness over the previous Doctor leaving. However, thanks to the bi-generation, Ncuti gets a whole 15 minutes to show us how delightful he is, and the decision to give 14 a happy ending allows the audience to enter 15's era with a clean emotional slate. At least, sane people. Some of y'all are just racist. Plus, I feel like there's one key thing a lot of people don't get. If anyone is going to be happy about sharing the screen with David Tennant, it's Ncuti Gatwa. He's the Doctor that Ncuti grew up with, just like Tom Baker and Peter Davison were for David, and getting to share the screen with someone who influenced him so profoundly was such a special moment for him. Not to mention, the fact that Ncuti can right off the bat hold his own alongside an actor of David's caliber speaks to the tremendous amount of faith Russell has in him. If anything, he steals the show from David, literally. If nothing else, these two have such fantastic rapport, and it's a pity we only get to see them play off each other for such a short time. Though I suppose if they had, the screen would have exploded from the sheer power of their combined riz. But most importantly, I think the bi-generation was necessary for this reason. The Doctor needed a reset, and so did their show. Of all the emotional conclusions I expected the specials to reach, the Doctor retires and gets therapy was one I never knew I needed and never dared to hope for. This sad man in a box has been running around the galaxy accumulating trauma and war crimes for a long, long time, and at some point it's just too much. Every writer feels like they have to keep topping the tragedies of the last, and it becomes impossible for Doctor Who to stay the fun, life-affirming romp through the universe it was always meant to be. There's just something about David's acting as the 14th Doctor that is just so subtly devastating. Obviously, having him back feels super warm and fuzzy to anyone who grew up loving 10. Oh look! David Tennant getting TARDIS zoomies! David Tennant saying Al-on-Z! David Tennant doing eyebrow gymnastics! David Tennant having devastating emotional meltdowns! It's like I'm 11 years old again! But what David does so tremendously with this incarnation is showing that this Doctor carries the weight of all his previous lives on his shoulders. Though he still faces the universe with a smile and a playfully cocked brow, he is so tired and so regretful from eons of running and losing people and never ever talking about it. And to have all of that represented in a familiar face that went through so much in such a relatively short time just makes it all the more poignant. David's Doctor is, on one hand, fundamentally the same Doctor he's always been, but he's also changed, because how could he not be? 14 shows us a Doctor who's sweeter, more affectionate, more openly vulnerable than the Doctor has perhaps ever allowed himself to be. A Doctor that goes toward rather than away from his companions in times of hardship and accepts his regeneration with grace and dignity. He's also a different Doctor because David's a different person. I had a bit of an emotional moment looking at one of the first promotional pictures of David as the 14th Doctor, recognizing in him the childhood hero I've known and loved for years, but also seeing how time has changed him, his warm, twinkling eyes now deeply lined with the grins and grimaces of 15 years, both on-screen and off. David is 53 years old now. He's played countless roles since the Doctor, many of which have undeniably worn on him emotionally. At the same time as being one of the hardest working actors of his generation, he's somehow raised 5 children and nearly lost both his youngest daughter and his wife. He's been a dedicated advocate for the marginalized in a country full of people who would like to see them wiped off the face of the planet, and he's been endlessly generous with his fans, giving so much of his time and energy at stage tours and cons, even in the midst of significant personal and mental struggles. In short, he's lived an endeavor as enlightening as it is exhausting. One can infer from various comments he's made that coming back in his 50s to a role he played in his quote-unquote prime seems to have been a bit vulnerable and challenging for David.
Happy 60th birthday, Doctor Who! You're older than me.
The pressure to fit into society's ideals of cool and young is a struggle shared by many actors, especially when your best-known role is, to many, the personification of these ideals. No matter how hard you try, it's impossible to stay the same version of yourself that you were 15 years ago, physically or emotionally, which is part of why I was so irked by David being airbrushed in the 60th promotional images. There's a scene where the Doctor laments his own inadequacies to Donna, fearing he's nothing without the TARDIS, the Sonic, the cleverness, that I have no doubt David, who has spoken at length about his struggles with imposter syndrome, deeply connected with. The fear of not living up to the version of yourself everyone expects you to be is something that every actor has felt at least once, and when you're trying to run as fast or fit into a costume made for a 35-year-old version of yourself, I'm sure those fears are more acute than ever. But in David's performance as 14, you can see not only every person the Doctor's been since season 4, but every person David's been, and the wisdom, grace, and empathy they have both gained from their experiences is so beautifully present. There was a lovely reblog left by my mutual Nastasia Flipanova on a Tumblr post I did titled On David Tennant and Aging, where she describes how the love and respect we feel for David as a fandom has grown from that of a brother or best friend to that of a father figure as he's grown older. And I think that quite beautifully sums up how I felt watching these specials. I like to think that when Ncuti hugs David in the penultimate scene of The Giggle, which has gone on to become one of my favorite scenes in Doctor Who history, on a meta level, it's the generation that grew up with him, both thanking him for being the person who inspired them and respecting and cherishing the person he is now. May we all grow to have the compassion for our former selves that 15 shows 14 in this scene, and may we all embrace the beauty that comes with having lived, rather than shying away from it.
I've never been so happy in my life.
If someone asks me to name my favorite Christmas movies, my answer will be as follows: It's a Wonderful Life, Klaus, The Polar Express, and Nativity 2, Danger in the Manger, baby! Everyone has that one objectively terrible movie they're very emotionally attached to for no reason, except me, because I'm too obnoxiously concerned with having good taste. That is, until last Christmas Eve, when I bore witness to the cinematic train wreck I made a masterpiece that is Nativity 2, Danger in the Manger. And yes, I am saying the full title every time, because it's Nativity 2, Danger in the Manger. I'm not even going to say much about this movie in this video because I have a full video planned for a Christmas special, but all you need to know for now is that this movie has everything. It has David Tennant screaming "That's my wife" while said wife rescues him by a helicopter. It has evil twin David Tennant doing laughably terrible choral conducting. It has a Cockney musical themed Christmas song called When You're Poor at Christmas. It has Gordon Shakespeare, one of the greatest characters in cinematic history. It has Mr. Poppy, who commits enough crimes in this movie to be sentenced to over 1,000 years in prison. If Nativity 2, Danger in the Manger has 100 fans, I am one of them. If Nativity 2, Danger in the Manger has 10 fans, I am one of them. If Nativity 2, Danger in the Manger has 1 fan, I am that fan. If Nativity 2, Danger in the Manger has no fans, I am dead. Something I definitely regret not mentioning in the queer icon section of my video essay is David's gem of a performance as transgender barmaid Davina in a 1993 episode of the sitcom Rab C Nesbitt. While probably not a casting that would fly today, 21-year-old David nonetheless inhabits Davina with such grace, loveliness, and seductive charm, his soft voice and elegant movements effortlessly selling you on the character's femininity. It's a delightful example of David's eagerness to subvert gender expectations and empathy towards the queer community, even this early in his career, not to mention he's a stunner with long brown curls. One of the few pieces of David Tennant media I've watched that has actually had me like, you need to stop, this is mental illness, is Rex is Not Your Lawyer, an unaired TV pilot from 2010 that someone was kind enough to upload on YouTube. It has since been taken down. Likely intended as his next major project following Doctor Who, David stars as Rex Alexander, who, having lost his job as an attorney as a result of frequent, comically unrealistic panic attacks, now coaches clients to represent themselves. Now, when discussing Rex is Not Your Lawyer, it is important to address the elephant in the room.
January 23rd, 2010. Lake Industrials versus Avalon Insurance.
Oh god, he's American in this. Abort! Abort! Look, it's not that David's American accent is bad. Like, it's objectively fine. It just sucks all the riz out of his voice.
This is the knife I took from Jared.
Who are you, and what have you done with David John Tennant? And to make matters worse, they have him narrating through the whole thing. It's a combination of the writing, the accent, and the less than stellar supporting cast that make this performance not quite work for me. Rex is brilliant but arrogant, off-kilter, and in desperate need of a good humbling, which David can by all means do well, with Casanova and the 10th Doctor both also being cocky geniuses. But I don't know if it's the writing or the effect that the accent has on his delivery, but at least in the first half of this episode, this character just feels way more douchey than what David can pull off. David can obviously play terrible people, but when it comes to characters you're meant to root for, I really think he needs someone a bit more earnest to be believable. Not even Peter Carlisle felt this slimy. The premise of the show is undeniably hooky, and Rex definitely grew on me as the episode went on. There's a brilliant scene involving fake teardrops where David really gets to flex both his comedic and dramatic chops, and he also has a lovely sincere moment with his ex-girlfriend at the end. But it's probably for the best that this series didn't work out. I know a lot of people would love David to do more big projects in the US, but I think he's much happier close to home, where he can be with his family and keep his fame at a somewhat manageable level. I don't even begrudge the pilot its flaws, really. Like, it's objectively not good, but it's camp of the highest order. Plus, it did give us those pictures of David golfing.
Dear viewers, do you like your men sad, wet, pathetic? Do all of your favorite fanfics involve wrapping your Blorbo in a blanket and giving him soup? Do you, like me, think the scene from episode 4 of Around the World in 80 Days where Phileas Fogg gets poisoned and has a heart-wrenching hallucination of his long-lost love is the most underrated scene of David Tennant's entire career? Then allow me to introduce you to the most sopping wet David Tennant project of them all, Kafka the Musical!
Okay, before you David Tennant musical theater truthers get too excited, trust me, I'm one myself, Kafka the Musical is a bit of a misleading title. An audio drama featuring music by none other than Murray Gold, Kafka is a beautifully surreal fever dream of sorts in which Franz Kafka, played by David, is asked to star in a musical about his own life. It's never made quite clear which scenes are actually happening and which are merely part of the show within a show, a really smart narrative device that places you inside Kafka's confused and troubled mind. David gives such a tender and fragile performance full of regret and longing, making the abandoned child and world-weary man in Kafka apparent all at once.
Remember when you left me in the rain? When I was afraid at night? When I was crying in my room? You put me outside and shut the door?
It wasn't raining.
Well, actually it was. And also, the fact it was raining is only a detail in that little episode.
I don't know what you're talking about.
That's right, the truth belongs to you, not me.
The scenes with Dora are some of the most achingly romantic of his entire career.
If you could hear me. If I could only speak. I would use my last breath to tell you that I love you. More than life. More than anything. My Dora. My darling Dora.
And his portrayals of Kafka's anxiety and imposter syndrome get a bit too real.
Need a better man than me? Yes, you do. Is it too late to replace me?
Why would we replace you? Hey, Grossman thinks you're perfect.
When my lungs are so weak I can't sing, how can I be perfect? Yes, there are similarities between myself and this character I'm playing, but other than that, I'm far from perfect. I'm quite an odd choice, in fact. An oddity, a frightened, lonely oddity, that's what I am.
And yes, it does end with him singing a tear-jerking love ballad. Out of everything on this list, There She Goes is the show I most regret not watching in time for Weird and Wonderful Legacy. Like, that was just kind of a major oversight on my part. There She Goes follows the Yates family as they go through the ups and downs of raising their daughter Rosie, who was born with a rare chromosomal disorder. Starring alongside the outstanding Jessica Hines as Emily, who you may remember from projects as diverse as Human Nature / Family of Blood and Nativity 2? David plays father Simon Yates, a fictionalized version of series creator Sean Pye. There She Goes is simultaneously lighthearted and devastating, alternating between the present and flashbacks to Rosie's infancy, which allows you to see the growth in the characters' relationships and understanding of Rosie's condition over time. The alternating time periods of There She Goes present David with a unique acting challenge, portraying both the selfish and immature Simon of the flashbacks and the still very flawed, but much more thoughtful and caring man he grows into. I talked in my previous video essay about how good David is at portraying the emotionally stunted man-child, a category Simon very much falls into. He suffers from abandonment issues as a result of his father leaving as a child, and very nearly does the same thing to his own family. He's often very unlikable, a part of the character David doesn't shy away from, but the depths of vulnerability and sincere love that shine through in his best moments make for one of the most painfully human roles in David's filmography. Together with Jessica Hines, in my opinion, one of David's most underrated collaborators, the two of them paint such a raw and sincere portrait of a couple struggling to love each other in the midst of unprecedented circumstances, and it remains one of the best on-screen portrayals I've seen of the equally profound joy and exhaustion of parenthood, which I've no doubt both of them could relate to. Oh, and of course, it's delightful to see him play a character who's as much of a sci-fi nerd as he is. No one in this family is neurotypical. On my boyfriend's recommendation, I listened to David in the 2002 audio drama Sunburst Finish, in which David plays a music student struggling with suicidal ideation, who, perhaps a bit unfortunately, is also named David. As a music major myself, I found this drama especially relatable, both getting a kick out of the numerous musicological references, I know what 12 tone is, and resonating with Davy's increasing despair over the seeming impossibility of creating something truly new. He also sings a couple of Nirvana songs in this, quite well actually. I'd love to hear him do more in this style. Remember that time David played an extremely powerful alien? No, not that time. I'm talking about the Lord Commander, the main antagonist of the first season of Final Space, who of all of David's voice acting roles I most wish I had mentioned in the original video essay. I didn't actually watch Final Space in its entirety, but someone was nice enough to upload a nice 13-minute compilation of all of the Lord Commander's scenes, and holy word I'm not allowed to say on YouTube because my parents watch my videos. This performance had me gagged.
Avocado, we had a deal. You promised me E35-1 and you failed. Again.
Between the disturbing voice filter and the American accent, which weirdly works so much better here than it did in Grace Point or Rex Is Not Your Lawyer, this is hands down the most unrecognizable I've ever heard David. He brings the perfect combination of gleeful gremlin energy and apocalyptic menace, resulting in one of his funniest and most terrifying performances.
Ooh, hooray! When will it be mine? Wait, are you hiding it on you? Is this a game? I love games.
I also watched all of David's scenes from the Loud House movie, which only cemented my opinion that groundskeeper Angus is the sweetest, loveliest character in David's entire filmography. His voice is just so warm and cozy in this, like a super soft old blanket you've had since childhood.
Oh, it hurts me to hear you say such a thing. The people need you now more than ever.
He's in this movie a lot too, like a solid half of the scenes. He's easily the second most significant character after Lincoln. I also thought it was hilarious that Angus gets crowned Duke at the end of this movie, considering David is rumored to be super anti-monarchy. What other voice things did I watch with David? There's Peter and the Wolf and Jazz, which has to win the award for the most niche special interest bottom of the iceberg thing on this list. It's a recording of Prokofiev's classic children's symphony arranged for a jazz band, which did make my music nerd heart happy, and David's narrations add quite the captivating touch.
No sooner had Peter gone than an enormous grey wolf did come out of the forest.
I watched all of his scenes from Ferdinand, in which David once again puts way too much humor and sincerity into a 5-minute bit role in a B-list children's movie.
Can I tell you my terrible secret? Can I whisper it in your ear? I cannot see very well.
Oh, and there's one more, but this one makes me mad. So, my amazing, wonderful boyfriend is a really big Discworld fan, and way back in 2009, one of the books, The Amazing Maurice and His Educated Rodents, was adapted into a radio drama which is sadly no longer available online. The radio drama starred none other than David Tennant as Dangerous Beans, the spiritual leader of the titular Educated Rodents, who has an existential crisis upon realizing that a children's book in which rats live in harmony with humans is in fact just a children's book, not a sacred prophetic text promising hope of a better future. Sounds like a perfect role for David, right? Well, according to Merlin, it was. A performance filled with such devastating hope and innocence that we actually named an entire niche of David Tennant character the Dangerous Beans typecast. Said niche also includes Franz Kafka, Arthur Eddington, Donald Peterson, and Phileas Fogg. I will not elaborate further on what this means. Even though, as I said, the radio drama is no longer available online, a film adaptation was released in 2022, with David reprising the role of Dangerous Beans. So Merlin and I decided it would be fun to watch it together. After all, surely the integrity of both the story and David's original performance had been preserved in the transition to the big screen, right? Well, much to our gradually dawning horror, not only had they turned Terry Pratchett's witty, poignant, and genuinely harrowing novel into a generic, unfunny kids movie, but they completely exterminated the character of Dangerous Beans. It wasn't enough that they removed all of the qualities that made Book Dangerous Beans an endearing and memorable character. No, they had to give him such bland, nothing-ass dialogue that this is genuinely the only performance I have ever heard of David's where he sounds bored. Yes, that's right! Someone, word I can't say on YouTube, this movie up so badly that David Tennant sounds bored.
Bring forth the sacred book.
There's literally one line where he sounds remotely emotionally invested, like, "Go girl, give us nothing?" Not to mention, this sorry excuse for a movie commits the cardinal film adaptation sin of giving a character's central emotional moment to a completely different character who didn't earn it, thereby not only robbing us of a potentially excellent David Tennant losing it scene, but lessening the emotional impact of the entire film! So congratulations, the less than stellar Maurice! You are officially the worst and most disappointing project of David Tennant's career, and I hope none of you watch it because it's the only thing I've seen him in that I genuinely consider to be a complete waste of time! Anyways, I'm done YouTuber raging. Let's talk about a movie I actually enjoyed now. Sometimes a busy college student slash creative just really needs a nice comfort watch. So one night, since it was free on YouTube, I decided to throw on Learners. And even though I'm sure it has some writing problems, I think this movie is so cute. It's written by Jessica Hines, who also stars as Bev, an endearing but neurotic housewife desperate to finally pass her driving test, with David playing her instructor, Chris. Chris was apparently written specifically with David in mind, which is hilarious considering the character Jessica came up with is lovably geeky Anglican.
Would you like to come to church with me?
Who somehow has more game than almost all of David's other characters in spite of being saddled with the most unflattering pair of glasses he's ever been in?
I'm an Anglican. We're desperate.
He even gets the reverse of the classic rom-com trope where the female lead's glasses get taken off and everyone sees how pretty she is. He also tries to beat up Con O'Neill at one point, which I'm sure all the Our Good Shadows fans found hilarious.
This is a no-smoking area, you bastard!
This movie isn't gonna change anyone's life, but it's a fun recommend that made me smile a lot. I got quite invested in cheering for Bev as she tries to better herself and gain more independence, and it's always a good time watching David be surprisingly swoon-worthy. One time on a lunch break from composing Crowley's Lament, I decided to turn on David's episode of Criminal UK, which I realized even then was maybe not the most fun way to spend a lunch break. David kind of does the same thing in this episode that he does in Deadwater Fell, but better? I guess this is just David's murdering children beard or something. His only line for literally the entire first half of the episode is no comment, which on one hand gets old really fast, but it's also so worth it when the switch happens. Look, obviously David's amazing at roles like this, but in the past few years he's just done so many of them. So I don't know, part of me just wants to like prescribe him to only playing the sweetest cinnamon rolls for the rest of the 2020s for his mental health or something. Like, I need more 14 and Phileas Fogg, less of this. Please make Tenant Sheen House in the Cerulean Sea happen. Please make Tenant Sheen House in the Cerulean Sea happen. Trigger warning, the next section contains discussion of Nazism. One night, I was doing my usual Tumblr scroll when I was confronted with the image of David Tennant in a Nazi uniform. This, of course, was from the newly released pro shot of C.P. Taylor's Good, which David received an Olivier nomination for last year. I'd known the subject matter of the play already, but I suppose the reality of it hadn't hit me till then. I knew that out of everything I'd seen with David, this play would probably be the most difficult to watch. And boy oh boy, was I right. John Halder, in my opinion, is the most terrifying role David has ever played. I've seen David play serial killers, abusers, rapists, and none of these overtly malicious monsters have chilled me to the bone more than he did. He represents a kind of evil that is much more everyday and therefore much more insidious. A self-absorbed, sickeningly apathetic man who chooses over and over to remain willfully ignorant in the face of atrocities for the sake of his own personal convenience,
all the while swearing that he is decent, that he is moral. Good is somewhat misleadingly marketed as a good man's descent into Nazism, so I expected John to be a bit harder to dislike. Obviously, disliking a Nazi should be the least difficult thing in the world, but I admit that before his inevitable downfall, I was prepared for David to make me care about him, because he's David. I was expecting his loss of humanity to be the tragedy, or at least part of it. How wrong I was. This is David at his most bravely unsympathetic. John's arc ultimately feels less tragic than inevitable. From the beginning of the play, we're shown that he really wasn't a good person to begin with, and David's performance hammers home just how weak-willed, petulant, and uncompassionate he can be. He's repeatedly cold and unempathetic to his mother with dementia and treats her like a burden. He swears up and down that he's only joining the Nazi party to protect his family, then leaves his wife and children for one of his students. And he carelessly shrugs off every implication of the atrocities Hitler is planning, all while his Jewish best friend pleads with him to see reason. He isn't tortured by the bad things he's done. He's childishly annoyed by anyone who dares to tell him the things he's done are bad. I sat through pretty much the entirety of Good with this expression on my face. When it was over, I never wanted to think about it again, and then proceeded to think about it for the rest of the day. If I were teaching a class on this period of history, this play would be required viewing. It's a harrowing study of what happens not when ordinary people say yes to evil, but when they don't say no. And it brilliantly illustrates the hypocrisy of the Nazi Party, claiming to serve the common good over the individual while acting in its own self-interest at every turn. And the play doesn't for 1 second let you sit in security that people like this are few and far between, or even that you're not one of them. I've heard people I know use the same rhetoric that John uses, and it messed with me. Watching Good brought me to a fascinating realization about David's performances. Actors will often tell you that playing the villain is more fun than playing the hero. However, with David, at least from the outside, he appears to subvert this very frequently. Because the thing about David Tennant heroes is that they're fun. They're clever and funny and joyful and complicated and tortured and soft. David Tennant villains, on the other hand, are not only terrifying moral vacuums, but they're boring. Kilgrave, Barty Crouch Jr., and a few of the voice acting roles are the only villain roles of his I can look at and be like, wow, he had so much fun with this. When it comes to his most recent villain roles, like Edgar from Criminal UK, Tom Kendrick, Dennis Nilsson, and John Halder, also maybe Kale Ehrenreich, I don't know because I can't find Bad Samaritan on any of my streaming services, I just think, wow, this must have been such a bleak and arduous task for you. In the words of Simone Weil, imaginary evil is romantic and varied. Real evil is gloomy, monotonous, bland, and boring. Imaginary good is boring. Real good is always new, marvelous, intoxicating. But David is one of the few actors who manages to bring this into the fictional world. When he gets to play real, sincere good, it is absolutely glorious. And when he plays evil, you don't want anywhere near it. For now, that's about it. I hope you guys enjoyed this little follow-up. I've got lots of big ideas planned for the future, but most significantly, a deep dive into Will Wood's The Normal album, which I hope to be able to share with you all sometime in the next couple of months. I probably won't be super active throughout July and August, as I'm going on a very exciting Shakespeare study abroad trip to London and Edinburgh and starting my absolutely packed junior year of college, but I will of course continue to keep you guys updated. I hope you guys are all having a wonderful Pride Month.
Yeah, baby! That's what I've been waiting for. That's what it's all about.